Hello there. This is my one-take video for No Country for Old Men. You probably can't hear it, but I have a soundtrack for this video. It's Aaron Copland's movie music. The reason I picked Aaron Copland is because he reminds me of the Old West. And since No Country for Old Men is set in the West, I thought it was appropriate. But also because Aaron Copland wrote some pretty interesting and influential movie music, including what you're listening to here. This is the soundtrack to The Red Pony. He also did the soundtrack for Our Town and a number of other films as well. But anyway, that is our soundtrack. But mostly what I'm going to be talking about here is the book, No Country for Old Men. But first, I just wanted to follow up on the previous video I did, which ended kind of in a disorganized fashion, because I was looking through a list of Oscar nominees for this year, and I couldn't find the category I was looking for. What I was trying to conclude with was the award for Best Adapted Screenplay, and Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice was nominated in that category, and I certainly hope it wins. I think it is a very, very interesting, difficult adaptation. And I recently read a review. It's either in the Washington Post or the New Yorker, which was raved about Inherent Vice, particularly as an adaptation, and the reviewer thought it was a very, very good adaptation. And mostly because it's like Pynchon's original. It's pretty inconclusive, and there's all sorts of subplots that don't really go anywhere. But that's sort of Pynchon's focus. All right, let me go on to talk about No Country for Old Men. This is I do have a copy of this book. I have the paperback copy. It is the movie tie-in version. So I did mention that in a previous video that it's a significant publishing event when a book is a movie tie-in book comes out, because I was talking about how the oftentimes we if we see the movie and then read the book, the actors in the film are the ones who play the parts in the book. I read this book on I was on a train trip, so it was another immersive experience of reading. I just sat there and there was nothing else to do except read, so I read through the entire book. I read it for this class. I wasn't really I'm not attracted to violent books, and that's what I've heard about Cormac McCarthy's book. He's a brilliant writer, but his stories are often quite violent, and so they don't hit the top of my to read list. That said, and I'll say more things about the violence in a moment. It was a very an interesting read. This, you can say this is a national bestseller. This particular, I don't think it won any significant awards. All the Pretty Horses won Cormac McCarthy a National Book Award, and then the book he wrote after this one, The Road, won him the Pulitzer Prize. So he's racked up a lot of awards, particularly in the last 10-15 years or so. I was doing a little research, and well, let me say something about The Road, which is McCarthy's, as I said, the book that he wrote immediately after No Country for Old Men, and it was lauded and was a New York Times bestseller for quite a while. And it was actually a selection of an Oprah book club, which, if you've read The Road, you can sort of raise your eyebrows at that. Again, The Road is sort of a post-apocalyptic story. There's been some sort of nuclear exchange, followed by nuclear winter, and so there's no food to eat. So people sort of walk around, and if they encounter other people, oftentimes those other people are cannibals. and but occasionally they'll come across a house or something that has a cache of good food. Anyway, that's basically the story of The Road. Is a father and his son traveling through this terrible post-apocalyptic world, not that dissimilar from, say, the world in The Walking Dead. And basically they're in the road, they're looking for food, and the son often says, "I'm hungry," and that's basically the story. So, but nonetheless, it's harrowing. I did read the book, even though I heard it was violent. I haven't yet uh, summoned the bravery to see the film version with Viggo Mortensen, which supposedly was a good adaptation, but very, very bleak. So, and involved a scene in which people eat a baby. So I thought I would skip that. But as I said, Oprah chose The Road as a selection on her book club. Apparently, it wasn't the most popular pick, though it certainly sold a lot of books. Cormac McCarthy, but as I said, I don't think it was that popular. Again, in terms of the violence and the bleakness of the story. Let me go from that to say that Oprah's gone now, and in terms of her show and her book club, which, as I said, was very important for a lot of creative writing, literary fiction types. So, but that's gone now. What Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook he's trying to revive this idea of the book club. So he's doing it at Facebook. But unlike Oprah, who I think almost exclusively focused on works of fiction, Zuckerberg is focusing more on nonfiction. So the first book was The End of Power by Moises Naim. Um, Apparently 1,500 people liked the conversation about the book, and but there were only 200 comments, so it was considered somewhat of a disappointment. The next pick is going to be Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, which is an interesting book. I haven't read either of those two books, but I do think it's interesting that Zuckerberg's trying to revive this idea and trying to get people to actually read books instead of just surfing Facebook. All right, so let me switch back to talking about No Country for Old Men. It's maybe some of this appeared in my essay on No Country for Old Men, but I mentioned in a previous video the word auteur, Auteur, the French term for author, or in the film context, for the writer, director, the person who controls the creative vision. And the Coen brothers are often labeled as auteurs, as artistic directors, though it's not super serious artwork. It's has some humor to it. So that's sort of the Coen brothers brand. So again, I'm sort of tying together the idea of the auteur and the brand, because they pretty much mean the same thing. No Country for Old Men is certainly a very good Coen brothers film, and I did like it, though it took me quite a long time to actually see it. But the Coen brothers, in my mind, are sort of divided in their oeuvre, another French word, in their body of work, in terms of their violent, sort of noirish films, and then their comedy, almost screwball comedy type of film. So like The Big Lebowski would be my favorite in that, the latter category. Oh brother, wherefore art thou? Another Coen Brothers movie that I like. There's another one that didn't do much. Intolerable Cruelty with George Clooney and Catherine Zeta-Jones. I've actually taught that in another class as a revisionist screwball comedy. So yeah, I like the Coen Brothers plenty. I also, when one of their films considered one of their probably biggest busts, The Hudsucker Proxy. I saw a few months ago, and I really liked it. Again, that's sort of on the screwball side of things. On the other side is the violence. It does have some comedy mixed in with the violence, which is always something that bothered me. I don't really like farcical violence. I don't like violence staged to draw laughs. Um, and I know this is simplistic, but I kind of see Quentin Tarantino as being that sort of director, which is why I'm not a huge fan of his work. I acknowledge him as a master uh, and an auteur, a brilliant director, but not my cup of tea. I haven't seen yet the show Fargo, which I know was up for a bunch of Emmys, and there's Martin Freeman's in it, and Billy Bob Thornton. I've heard good things about it. I haven't seen it. Maybe I will, but that's partially because I wasn't a big fan of Fargo. So I would. I'm interested in it, sort of on a question of adaptation of. We have a movie adaptation of Fargo. Uh, I guess it wasn't a literary work originally, but anyway, then we got the television adaptation of the film, which is another whole area of adaptation, which I think is quite interesting. Um, about the violence in No Country for Old Men in the movie. I was just saying I'm bothered by mixing comedy and violence, and I when there was comedy, sort of dark comedy in No Country for Old Men, and there certainly was violence. I thought the Coen Brothers did a pretty good job of keeping those two separate, so that I think unlike maybe some of the other Coen Brothers movies, I think No Country for Old Men sort of raises the question about violence and gratuitous violence, and in showing it in all its messiness. So, ironically, those are the sorts of violent movies I approve of. I generally stay away from violent movies, but if the movie is showing violence in a very realistic way, if it's not there to titillate or to entertain, but to delve into the big questions of human nature, and certainly violence is a big question there. As long as films do that, I heartily approve and encourage people to see them. Um, but if it sort of goes over the edge to violence, almost pulp violence as entertainment, I'm not a huge fan. Um, that said, I think Javier Bardem, who plays Chigurh, um, brilliant job. Got an Oscar for it. I think mostly he sort of plays down the comedy in the character, which, by the way, there is no comedy in the character in the book. And then arguably he's more interesting in the film. But the opening scene of the film where Bardem, is picked up by the deputy, and he ends up, strangling with the chain. And in that scene, you sort of see his eyes popping out. Sometimes, like you see me when I'm doing these videos, but his eyes are popping out, and he looks like a sadistic monster. Whereas I think the rest of the performance and the character itself doesn't really call for that. And then, of course, there's the haircut. I was talking about Steve Carell in a previous video being nominated for his prosthetic nose in Foxcatcher. Yeah. And then, based on that, Nicole Kidman in her prosthetic nose winning an Oscar for The Hours. In some sense, I guess you could make the argument that that Bardem's haircut, his Prince Valiant haircut in No Country for Old Men, was a factor in him winning that award. But I think I mentioned that in my film essay, that that haircut is not in the book. And a lot of the humor in the film is not in the book, and that's shows some of the distinctions between literature and film. Another thing about violence in film as opposed to books. So for instance, reading No Country for Old Men, the book as opposed to seeing the film, for me, when I'm reading a book, I'm using my imagination, but it's a more intellectual experience when I'm sort of trying to imagine the violence that's being described on the page. Whereas in the film, the violence it's a physical thing for me. It's very visceral. In a sense, it's visceral and virtual. Those two things are combined for me. The virtual being a very realistic, immersive experience, which involves the body. So again, when I'm reading, it's all up here. When I'm seeing the violence on the screen, it's all here. I feel it physically. My body sometimes days afterwards. So that, again, that's another big difference between literature and film in terms of how we experience things like violence, and, and other things that if you have a good imagination, you can create a pretty immersive experience for yourself when you're reading. But when you're seeing a film, it's involving all your senses. So I think I'm going to 16 minutes. I'm going over. I think I can stop in there. Yeah, we'll just I'll throw in. Hopefully, this will go through. Um, that another thing for me in terms of watching violent movies, one way I can deal with that is well, actually stepping outside of the story world of the film, bringing a more critical perspective that allows me, creates some distance for me and makes it less scary for me. Anyway, I'm going to stop there and try to upload this. So I'll see you in a bit.